Okay, kids, let's carry on with wholes. We stopped at 40, and this is where we begin today. Zero's condition continued to improve. Stanley slowly peeled an onion. He liked eating them one layer at a time. The water hole was now almost as large as the holes he had dug back at Camp Green Lake. It contained almost 2 feet of murky water, 就是浑浊的水。Murky 你也可以用来形容就是状况很不明确。This is a murky situation. Okay. Stanley had dug it all by himself. Zero had offered to help, but Stanley thought it better for Zero to save his strength. It was a lot harder to dig in water than it was in a dry lake. Stanley was surprised. Stanley was surprised that he himself hadn't gotten sick, either from the sploosh, the dirty water, or from living on onions. 我有点不太确定这边这个 sploosh 指的是什么。事实上它就是一个打水的声音好像。He used to get sick quite a lot back at home. Both boys were barefoot. They had washed their socks. All their clothes were very dirty, but their socks were definitely the worst. They didn't dip their socks into the hole, afraid to contaminate the water. Contaminate, 污染。这个字一定要学会。Afraid to contaminate the water. Instead, they filled the jars and poured the water over their dirty socks. I didn't go to the homeless shelter very often, Zero said. Homeless shelter 就是无家可归的人的这个栖息处，就是政府给他们的保护的地方，让他们过夜的地方。Zero said, just if the weather was really bad. 天气很烂我才会去。I would have to find someone to pretend to be my mom. If I would just go by myself, they would have asked me a bunch of questions. If they found out I didn't have a mom, they would have made me a ward of the state. Ward of the state 就是未成年，然后被政府管，好像就是警察就会说，我就帮你安排到什么领养的家什么的。What's a ward of the state? Zero smiled. I don't know, but I didn't like the sound of it. Stanley remembered Mr. Pendenski telling the warden that Zero was a ward of the state. He wondered if Zero knew he had become one. 他说事实上他已经是了。I liked sleeping 就是那个 warden 典狱长，就是那个管改造营的那个人说 Zero 已经是一个 ward of the state 了。I liked sleeping outside, said Zero. I used to pretend I was a Cub Scout. I always wanted to be a Cub Scout. I would see them at the park in their blue uniforms. I was never a Cub Scout, said Stanley. I wasn't good at social stuff like that. Kids made fun of me because I was fat. I liked the blue uniforms, said Zero. Maybe I wouldn't have liked being a Cub Scout. 他只是喜欢制服，他可能不想当童子军。Stanley shrugged one shoulder. My mother was once a Girl Scout, said Zero. I thought you said you didn't have a mom. Everybody has to have a mother. Well, yeah, I know that. She said she once won a prize for selling the most Girl Scout cookies, said Zero. She was really proud of that. Stanley peeled off another layer of his onion. 他们现在就是在聊天了。We always took what we needed, Zero said. When I was little, I didn't even know it was stealing. I don't remember when I found out, but we just took what we needed, never more. So when I saw the shoes on display in the shelter, I just reached in the glass case and took them. Clyde Livingston's shoes? Clyde Livingston's shoes? Asked Stanley. I didn't know they were his. I just thought they were somebody's old shoes. It was better to take someone's old shoes, I thought, than steal a pair of new ones. I didn't know they were famous. There was a sign, but of course I couldn't read it. Then the next morning, I know everybody was making a big deal about how the shoes are missing. It was kind of funny in a way. The whole place is going crazy. There I was, wearing the shoes, and everyone's running around saying, what happened to the shoes? What happened to the shoes? The shoes are gone. I just walked out the door. No one noticed me. When I got outside, I ran around the corner and immediately took off the shoes. I put them on top of a parked car. I remember they smelled really bad. Yeah. Those were them, said Stanley. Did they fit you? Pretty much. Stanley remembered being surprised at Clyde Livingston's small shoe size. Stanley's shoes were bigger. Clyde Livingston had small, quick feet. Stanley's feet were big and slow. I should have just kept them, said Zero. I had already made it out of the shelter and everything. I ended up getting arrested the next day when I tried to walk out of a shoe store with a new pair of sneakers. If I had just kept those old smelly sneakers, then neither of us would be here right now. Zero became strong enough to help dig the hole. When he finished, it was over 6 feet deep. He filled the bottom with rocks to help separate the water from the dirt. 他在底下堆了一堆石头，好像可以把泥巴跟水分开，好像有点道理。He was still the best hole digger around. That's the last hole I'll ever dig, he declared. Declare 就是宣布，或者是声明。Declaration 声明。Throwing down the shovel. Stanley smiled. He wished it were true, but he knew they had no choice but to eventually return to Camp Green Lake. They couldn't live on onions forever. They had been completely around Big Thumb. It was like a giant sundial. Sundial 就是靠太阳的影子告诉你时间的一个东西，所以那个石头好像就变成他们的。这边有写一个日晷，为什么叫日晷？有一个小孩子查了这个字。They followed the shade. They were able to see out in all directions. There was no place to go. The mountain was surrounded by desert. Zero stared at Big Thumb. It must have a hole in it, he said, filled with water. You think? Where else could the water be coming from? Zero asked. Water doesn't run uphill. Stanley bit into an onion. It didn't burn his eyes or nose, and, in fact, he no longer noticed a particularly strong taste. He remembered when he had first carried Zero up the hill, how the air had smelled bitter. It was the smell of thousands of onions, growing and rotting and sprouting. 他第一天背他上山的时候， 他就闻到了 growing and rotting 又在增长又在腐烂又在发芽。Now he didn't smell a thing. How many onions do you think we've eaten? He asked. Zero shrugged. I don't know. I don't even know how long we've been here. I would say about a week, said Stanley, and we probably each eat about 20 onions a day, so that's 280 onions, said Zero. Stanley smiled. I bet we really stink. 2 nights later, Stanley lay awake, staring up at the star-filled sky. He was too happy to fall asleep. He knew he had no reason to be happy. He had heard or read somewhere that right before a person freezes to death, he suddenly feels nice and warm. He wondered if perhaps he was experiencing something like that. It occurred to him, occurred 就是发生嘛，对不对？但是 it occurred to him 就是他意识到了，他意识到一件事 that he couldn't remember the last time he felt happiness. It wasn't just being sent to Camp Green Lake that had made his life miserable. Before that, he had been unhappy at school, where he had no friends, and bullies like Derek Dunn picked on him. No one liked him, and the truth was, he didn't especially like himself. He liked himself now. He wondered if he was delirious. 觉得他自己是不是疯了？ He looked over at Zero sleeping near him. Zero's face was lit in the starlight, and there was a flower petal in front of his nose that moved back and forth as he breathed. 有一个花瓣在他鼻子前面，被他的呼吸晃来晃去。It reminded Stanley of something out of a cartoon. Zero breathed in, and the petal was drawn up almost touching his nose. Zero breathed out, and the petal moved toward his chin. It stayed on Zero's face for an amazingly long time before fluttering off to the side. Stanley considered placing it back in front of Zero's nose, but it wouldn't be the same. It seemed like Zero had lived at Camp Green Lake forever. But as Stanley thought about it now, he realized that Zero must have gotten there no more than a month or 2 before him. Zero was actually arrested a day earlier, but Stanley's trial kept getting delayed because of baseball. He remembered the trial, 就是他的审判一直被 delay. He remembered what Zero had said a few days before. If Zero had just kept those shoes, then neither of them would be here right now. As Stanley stared at the glittering night sky, 发光的夜晚的夜空, he thought there was no place he would rather be. 这一小段小朋友可以记住，他不想待在任何别的地方，在这一刻。He was glad that Zero put the shoes on the parked car. He was glad that they fell from the overpass and hit him on the head. Overpass 就是那个道路的那个桥，所以就是对他现在在回忆一开始发生的事。When the shoes first fell from the sky, he remembered thinking that destiny had struck him. Destiny, 命运. Now he thought so again. It was more than a coincidence. It had to be destiny. Coincidence, 巧合. Coincidental, 巧合. Maybe they wouldn't have to return to Camp Green Lake, he thought. Maybe they could make it past the camp, then follow the dirt road back to civilization. 就可以回到文明了，逃跑。They could fill the sack with onions and the 3 jars with water, and he had his canteen as well. 他们可以用他们的瓶子装水，逃走。They could refill their jars and canteen at the camp, maybe sneak into the kitchen and get some food. He doubted any counselors were still on guard. 他怀疑任何人还会有任何警觉性。Everybody had to think they were dead. Buzzard food. 大家一定都认为他们已经死掉了，变成鸟食了，就是很大的鸟的食物。It would mean living the rest of his life as a fugitive. Fugitive 就是逃犯，一天到晚逃跑的人。The police would always be after him. At least he could call his parents and tell them he was still alive, but he couldn't go visit them in case the police were watching the apartment. Although, if everyone thought he was dead, they wouldn't bother to watch the apartment. He would have to somehow get a new identity. 如果大家都认为他死了，他就要找到另一个身份就好了。Somehow get a new identity. 另外一个身份，你的身份证就叫做 ID 就是这个字，前两个字母。Now I am really thinking crazy, he thought. He wondered if a crazy person wonders if he is crazy. But even as he thought this, an even crazier idea kept popping into his head. He knew it was too crazy to even consider. Still, if he was going to be a fugitive for the rest of his life, it would help to have some money, perhaps a treasure chest full of money. 如果要逃命的话呢，最好要有一些钱，或者根本就是一个宝藏的一个宝藏箱 treasure chest full of money. You're crazy, he told himself. Besides, just because he found a lipstick container with KB on it, that didn't mean there was treasure buried there. It was crazy. It was all part of his crazy feeling of happiness. Or maybe it was destiny. He reached over and shook Zero's arm. Hey, Zero, he whispered. Huh? Zero muttered. Wake up. What? Zero raised up his head. What is it? You want to dig one more hole? Stanley asked him. OK, 今天暂时到这里。我想这个故事好像越来越好看了。OK, we continue tomorrow.